Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, excluding the postage cost, I won this old HP Pavilion for just £10.50 in an online eBay auction. This P6000 series desktop, or special edition desktop I should say, thanks to the stylish bamboo leaf effect on the front, was in a bit of a mess, and it was one of those situations where I ended up not expecting to be the highest bidder for such a little amount of money. It originally came without a graphics card, but the Core i5-650, 8GB of RAM and 300W OEM PSU still sounded to me like a reasonable place to start. So I set aside a tiny budget to turn this into a more capable everyday and very light gaming rig. Aside from the dusting and the cleaning, I've made a couple of changes. The first was with the processor. The old i5-650 that was originally in here is a hyper-threaded part, unlike the 750 which is about the same age but actually has 4 physical cores, not just 2 cores and 4 threads. A first gen i5 will cost you pocket change in 2023, but I was still able to avoid spending anything by swapping with someone on Marketplace for a Xeon. They had a board which didn't work with the Xeons, and although I only had 2 cores to trade with, they only wanted it to test a few old 1156 motherboards before selling them on, so smiles all round. There's actually room for further upgrade too, as this board should work with quad-core hyper-threaded Xeons and i7, so we'll definitely be upgrading it further a little down the line. Next up, we needed a graphics card. We don't have much CPU power to play with, so a lower end GPU will be good enough here. I couldn't resist a GTX 750 Ti, an absolutely legendary card that I have a lot of love for. It's been an integral part of the channel since its release in 2014, and while it's hard to recommend these days due to its lack of full DX12 support, it's more than enough for the older titles that this computer is intended for. Plus it'll work no problem with the stock power supply. Traditional hard drives can be picked up for very little money as well, with 320GB SATA ones like this going for £1.50 at CEX. I definitely recommend a cheap solid state drive instead, as this will speed up boot and loading times, everything within Windows will just feel snappier, and it will transform the way an old PC like this feels to use on a daily basis. For everyday use and office work, for example, this will be fine, and while we've seen in the past that the GTX 750 Ti can handle AAA games with reduced quality settings, this PC in its entirety will be best for lightweight single or multiplayer games. My intention really with this was just to stop another old system from going to the scrapyard, and I like to think I've done that here. It's really nothing special, but it will give someone a bit of enjoyment, and I'll slap an SSD in it before selling it on. So then, games. What can it play? Old Xeons can still be quite impressive in the right motherboard, but atop this basic OEM HP board it is somewhat restrained. The 750 Ti actually has a lot more to give in some scenarios, and with that said, the experience overall is okay. Now, in all of the following game tests, you're probably going to see that the CPU is the limitation, and this could potentially be reflected in the 1 and 0.1% lows. By that I mean that you're going to see pretty low figures, but that's to be expected with this old chip. And as I said, I think we'll slap a 4-core hyper-threaded Xeon in here instead of this 4-core one that lacks any hyper-threading at all. In CSGO though, 103 FPS on average was surprisingly good, with a 1% low of 46 and a 0.1% low of just 9. So there were definitely some problems, but not terrible. Certainly not the worst experience I've had in this game. In the Elder Scrolls Skyrim Special Edition at 1080p with the low preset and TAA enabled here instead of FXAA, just to try and eliminate some of those jagged edges, we hit the FPS cap of 59. I thought this was capped at 60, but 59 here for some reason, but there we go. The 1.1% lows were actually pretty solid as well, so Skyrim Special Edition was more than playable, and if you wanted to target 30 FPS instead with a system like this, you could definitely turn the preset up to medium or high, and potentially set a few options to their highest as well. I was definitely playing it safe here, but it's nice to know that at these low settings we can hit the in-game cap with this setup. Team Fortress 2 is another game I enjoy to play from time to time, and it works quite well on this system. As expected, there will be a few dips and drops here and there, with the high textures, high models and everything else set to lowest. Now, choosing high textures and high models isn't essential, but we definitely had room to do so in terms of the performance figures, and turning these down doesn't really impact those 1.1% lows. It doesn't really improve anything, so I thought we may as well go a little bit higher with the settings. Apex Legends was quite surprising, very low textures here with everything else at lowest, and an adaptive 60 FPS target resolution, or as I've spelt it, resolution accidentally here. There's always something I pick up in editing, every time. 66 FPS though on average with this adaptive target in mind, and 52 was the 1% low, followed by 18 is the 0.1% figure, so you know it was okay. The occasional dip here and there, better than I thought with an old Xeon and a 750 Ti, that's for sure. Definitely a better experience than I anticipated. Fortnite, 96 FPS in performance mode. Here I also chose the high textures and epic view distance because they didn't really impact the 1.1% lows. The average was slightly lower, but we were still getting at least 60 FPS, which is what I hoped for in this game. There will be a few little dips and drops then, but it is definitely more than playable, and I was even able to wipe out a couple of enemies too, which is all you need really. If you can do that, then the game is playable, even if you're a terrible player like me. But yeah, again, more than I was expecting from this setup. A setup that's not really what I call a gaming machine by any means, but it is capable of those lighter titles, especially ones like this that have dedicated performance modes. Now, I apologise if this audio sounds different, but I almost forgot to include two games that are ideal for low spec systems like this one. The first of which is Valorant at 1080p with the lowest settings. The average FPS was 142 with a 1% low of 68 and a 0.1% low of 30, so nothing to worry about here with these settings, and you could even turn things up a bit if you wanted to. The next game is Minecraft, 1080p with 8 chunks render and simulation. I'm supposed to say simulation. Again, what is wrong with my spelling today? 279 FPS on average with a little bit of stutter here and there. That's partly the reason I didn't turn the settings up further. It's not because of the average frame rate, it's just because there would have been even more stutter. That's the main problem with one of these old 4-core, 4-thread CPUs. You're not going to have issues with the average numbers, it's going to be those percentile lows. Finally then we have Overwatch 2, 1080p with the medium preset, push the boundary a little bit here, 87 FPS. You can probably tell that the CPU is absolutely maxed out by that MSI overlay. 100% is pretty much what it was pinned to all of the time. That's probably because it doesn't have hyper-threading, so it's 4 physical cores, 4 threads, and you can see that reflected in this result. A few dips here and there, but it was more than playable, no problem here. And I think, again, this frame rate was a lot better than I anticipated. So for those lightweight titles and those free games, this is going to be a PC that does okay. But there we go, there are definitely some improvements to be made. Slap an SSD in here, slap a better Xeon or an i7 in this thing, and perhaps add a 10 series graphics card instead, and you've got yourself something that could be even more capable. Perhaps that's something we'll actually do in another video. But as for this one, and as for now, I hope you've enjoyed the transformation we've made to this special edition old tied HP that probably would have ended up thrown away, or who knows. If you did, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.